My hands were trembling. I wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or fear, or both. Maybe it was the cold blast of the air conditioner humming above my head, or the icy stare coming from across the desk. Either way, my entire body felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for one wrong move to collapse the only thing I had worked years to build, my career. Before I tell you what I signed, or rather what I changed, I need to take you back. Back to the morning it all started, when I walked into Halston and Price believing I had a stable future, not a loaded ultimatum. And if you're the kind of person who's ever been bullied at work, forced to stay silent, or made to feel small just to keep your job, this story is for you. Subscribe to Karma Encrypted to hear what happened when a woman like me decided to fight back, with just one word. They called it a strategic restructuring. But I knew it was a lie the moment HR refused to meet my eyes. I was one of the top audit specialists at Halston & Price, a boutique finance firm that managed multimillion-dollar portfolios and boasted zero tolerance for ethical violations, which, ironically, became their go-to slogan while burying evidence of their own. I had spent 6 years climbing the ladder. Started as a junior analyst straight out of college. I was the one who stayed late, triple-checked numbers, caught inconsistencies in tax shelters that saved the firm millions in legal exposure. And now? I was being called into a meeting I hadn't scheduled, with a director I barely spoke to, and a sheet of paper waiting for my signature. The door closed behind me like the click of a handcuff. "Scarlett," said Thomas Blevins, the senior director of internal operations. His voice was all gravel and disdain, the kind you'd expect from someone who treats every employee like a threat. He gestured at the chair across from his mahogany desk. "Have a seat." I didn't. "I wasn't aware of this meeting," I said calmly. "Should I have brought legal counsel?" His smile was tight, like he'd rehearsed it. "Nothing formal. Just some transition paperwork." He pushed the document toward me. My name was printed in bold at the top. Voluntary resignation, effective immediately. I felt the air rush out of the room. "Voluntary?" I echoed. "You'll find the terms generous," he replied smoothly. 3 months severance. Full release of liability. A glowing recommendation. I stared at the paper. "What's this really about?" He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "We're pivoting. Downsizing. Your department's being absorbed. It's not personal." Liar. I had just submitted a flagged report, one detailing financial irregularities in an internal project codenamed Thistle. It wasn't part of my assigned accounts, but I'd noticed a pattern. Misplaced line items. Duplicate vendors. Unexplainable wire transfers. When I brought it up to my supervisor, she told me to drop it. When I didn't, she stopped replying to my emails. Now suddenly, I was being asked to walk away, quietly. "If I don't sign this?" I asked, staring him dead in the eye. He raised an eyebrow. "Then we moved to termination. For non-compliance. I'd hate for your record to reflect that. So would most future employers." My fists clenched. "That sounds a lot like coercion." "It's business," he said. "And this is your one graceful exit. Clock's ticking." He slid a pen across the table. I didn't touch it. Instead, I read every word. Slowly. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to spot landmines. Hidden in the fine print was a clause that barred me from discussing any internal affairs with outside entities. That meant if I signed, I couldn't speak to the press. Couldn't alert regulators. Couldn't even tell a friend over coffee. It was more than a resignation. It was a silencing agreement. I looked at Blevins. "You typed this up yourself?" "It's standard language," he said. "Mind if I make one edit?" He smirked. "Knock yourself out." Big mistake. I took the pen in my right hand and drew a neat line through the phrase. "I acknowledge this resignation is entirely voluntary." And instead I wrote, "This resignation was signed under duress." Then I initialed it. "Done," I said, handing it back. He stared at the document, and for the first time that morning, his confidence cracked. "You can't write that." "You said I could." "This voids the agreement." "Only if you don't process it." We stared at each other. He knew it. I knew it. The moment he accepted that altered resignation, it was no longer the silencing trap he thought it was. It was evidence. I walked out of that office with a copy of the document, and fire in my chest. They thought I'd be afraid. They thought I'd vanish quietly like the others. But I had a paper trail. I had dates. I had flagged reports. And now I had a legally binding admission that I was forced out under pressure, right after surfacing financial inconsistencies. I knew what I had to do next. That afternoon, I visited the public library. Logged into an encrypted drive I'd built long ago, just in case. Uploaded everything, the resignation letter, the report on Project Thistle, the email threads, the unsigned memos. Then I submitted it to the Office of the Inspector General through their secure whistleblower portal. I didn't use my name. Not yet. But I knew they'd find it soon enough. 2 days later, I got a call. Unknown number. Blocked ID. I answered. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. Ms. Rayner, this is Special Counsel Harris with the Department of Corporate Oversight. I believe you submitted a document of interest related to Halston and Price. My heart raced. I did. I'd like to meet. Quietly. Off the record, for now. I agreed. We met in the back corner of a small diner off Fremont Street. No badges. No briefcases. Just 2 coffees and the weight of what I'd done between us. He slid a printed document across the table. It was my resignation letter. You know what this is, right? He asked. I nodded. He smiled. Scarlett, this one sentence? It just opened a door we've been trying to kick down for months. It's a strange thing, watching people unravel, especially the ones who once looked at you like you were nothing. I walked into that diner scared. I left with purpose. Special Counsel Harris didn't treat me like a nuisance or a disgruntled employee. He treated me like a missing puzzle piece, one that had been hiding in plain sight. He slid a folder across the Formica table. Inside were documents I'd never seen, some redacted, some not. Halston and Price had been on the radar for nearly a year, but nothing stuck. Every time regulators got close, something mysteriously disappeared. Your resignation letter changed that, Harris said. It was 1 word, I replied. He grinned. That's all it takes sometimes. Over the next week, I became the center of something much bigger than me. Quiet meetings in parking garages. Encrypted phone calls. I signed confidentiality documents with federal stamps, and was assigned a liaison from a corporate fraud task force. They called me Asset Scarlett. I laughed when I saw the code name. It was surreal, being valued for what I knew, when only days before I was being erased. The investigation widened. It started with Project Thistle, the account I'd flagged that triggered this whole mess. But it didn't stop there. Beneath Thistle were layers of shell companies, dummy vendors, and offshore accounts. Dozens of transactions, each small enough to avoid automatic scrutiny. But together? It was over $9.3 million, all laundered through bogus service fees and consulting contracts to entities that didn't even exist. And the worst part? It wasn't just one executive. It was a network. Thomas Blevins wasn't the mastermind. He was the cleaner, the guy who signed off on terminations, buried internal complaints, and kept employees too afraid to ask questions. The real players were higher. Marissa Kane, Chief Financial Officer, and Eldon Price, son of one of the founding partners. Both untouchable. Or so they thought. Because now they had my resignation letter, my written proof of coercion, and the digital footprint I left behind when they tried to wipe me out. I had saved everything. Back at home, I kept my world small. I stopped answering non-secure calls. Used cash. Slept with my laptop locked in a steel safe. It sounds paranoid, but once you see what these people are capable of, once you realize just how deep corporate fraud can go, it changes the way you hear your own front door creak. One night, I noticed a car parked across the street. Same one, 3 nights in a row. I photographed the plates. Reported it. The car disappeared the next day. But my sense of peace didn't return with it. Then came the email. No sender. No subject. Just a message. You should have taken the deal, Scarlett. Now you've made yourself a problem. Problems get cleaned up. I forwarded it to Harris. He responded immediately. We're moving you into protective housing. Today. I blinked at my screen. Protective housing? Like witness protection? I didn't testify yet, I replied. He called me 5 minutes later. Scarlett, listen to me. We've had whistleblowers vanish mid-investigation. Your evidence ties into 2 separate federal cases. You're not just a threat to Halston and Price anymore, you're a threat to their entire infrastructure. That afternoon, I packed a suitcase and was escorted out of my apartment by 2 agents in plain clothes. They drove me to a safe unit in Henderson under a different name. 1 bedroom. No internet. A burner phone. A checklist of emergency procedures. I felt like I was living in a thriller novel I didn't sign up to write. But somehow, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Because the moment they tried to scare me into silence, they proved I was right to speak. 3 weeks passed. Investigators worked around the clock, feeding me questions about old reports, meeting transcripts, email chains. I remembered more than I realized. I even remembered an odd lunch meeting between Blevins and a woman with a fake company name, Lucent Strategies. That rang a bell. Investigators traced it to a Cayman Islands account linked to Kane. It was the break they needed. They called it the Lucent Key. And I had handed it to them, by accident. Or fate. The morning indictments were issued. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table with a bowl of stale cereal when the burner phone buzzed. Turn on Channel 5. I did. There she was, Marissa Kane, being escorted out of her office in handcuffs. Behind her, Eldon Price, red-faced and shouting, was surrounded by federal agents. The newscaster's voice cracked with disbelief. Arrested on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud investors. Sources say the investigation was triggered by a former employee's disputed resignation. I froze. There it was. The moment. The ripple from one word. That night, Harris called me. You did it. I didn't mean to, I said, laughing in disbelief. Yes, you did, he replied. Maybe not exactly like this, but you didn't stay silent. And now an entire network is exposed. I didn't cry until after he hung up. Then I sat on the floor in the quiet of that little apartment, knees to chest, and sobbed, not from fear this time, or even exhaustion, but from release. From knowing I'd been heard. A week later, I was allowed to return home. The threats slowed. The car never returned. The case moved into prosecution. Blevins resigned before charges hit. Kane and Price? Still in custody. Halston and Price froze half their accounts. And me? I was finally free. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I began writing a report, detailing everything. From the moment I flagged Thistle to the moment I altered the resignation letter. I published it under a pseudonym, but it spread like wildfire in professional circles. Other employees reached out. From other firms. From other states. Your story gave me the courage. I didn't know we could fight back. Thank you for not signing quietly. That's when I knew. This wasn't just my story. It was ours. The ripple had become a wave. Within a month of the televised arrests, Halston and Price was bleeding clients. News anchors didn't just mention my story, they dissected it. Legal blogs reposted my whistleblower report with headlines like, "The one-word edit that shook Wall Street." For a while, I just watched. Silently. Anonymously. But the longer I stayed hidden, the more I realized, hiding helped them. Not me. I had receipts. I had proof. And now, I had momentum. I scheduled a meeting with Harris. Not at a diner this time. At the downtown field office. Formal, secure, and very much official. I want to go public, I said as soon as the door closed. He raised an eyebrow. Scarlett, do you understand what that means? I do. He studied me like he was waiting for fear to show up. It didn't. I want to own this. My name. My narrative. He exhaled slowly. Then we'll protect you. But once this door opens, there's no shutting it again. I'm ready. 2 weeks later, I appeared on a morning news segment. Clean blazer. Natural makeup. No script. I looked straight into the camera and told America what really happened. I wasn't brave, I said. I was just done being scared. That line went viral. The clip was reshared across platforms. Hashtags exploded. Whistleblower forums lit up. A dozen other firms suddenly found themselves under scrutiny, some for the first time in years. And the strangest part? People started thanking me in public. At coffee shops. At crosswalks. Even in my building's elevator. Scarlett Rayner, they'd ask. And every time, I braced for something cruel. But what followed was always quiet. Respectful. Thank you for speaking. Because of you, I said something too. I never wanted fame. But I wasn't going to run from impact either. That's when I got the letter. Certified mail. A thick envelope, hand-signed. From the Department of Labor's Office of Whistleblower Protection. They weren't just acknowledging my actions. They were inviting me to testify. I was flown to D.C. under federal escort. Inside a sterile chamber with microphones and metal water pitchers, I told a room full of suits how a simple change on a resignation letter uncovered fraud, coercion, and years of buried corruption. Some senators leaned forward. Others didn't blink. But I didn't flinch. Because I had nothing left to lose, and everything to say. After my testimony, a woman in a navy dress approached me quietly. She didn't offer a card or introduce herself with a title. She simply said, "There's a clause in your contract I think you missed." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She smiled faintly. The Employee Confidentiality Addendum. Halston and Price made a critical error in how it was drafted. I tilted my head. Go on. They didn't update their NDAs after switching to a Delaware corporate structure. That means their confidentiality clause isn't just invalid, it could make them liable for silencing employees. She paused. You're not just protected, Scarlett. You may be entitled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out my old work documents. Cross-checked the clause she mentioned. She was right. They'd copied a California-formatted NDA into a Delaware-registered contract. It meant their legal threats were empty. Their silencing tactics? Legally void. And anyone they'd forced to sign that NDA, anyone they'd bullied, intimidated, or scared into walking away. They had a case. A massive one. I called Harris first thing in the morning. I think we've got a crack in the dam, I said. He asked me to explain. By the time I was done, he was silent. Then, Scarlett, this could open the floodgates. Exactly, I said. What do you want to do? Let it flood. We coordinated with a class-action law firm specializing in corporate silencing. They launched a campaign, Invalid Voices No More. Hundreds came forward. Former employees from Halston and Price. Contractors. Interns. Even junior partners. They'd all been made to sign NDAs with the same invalid clause. Some were forced to resign. Others were pushed out with threats. A few had tried to fight, but were crushed under legal fees and blacklisted from the industry. Now, they had leverage. And a face to lead the charge. The firm tried to issue a press release dismissing the clause as a clerical oversight. It backfired spectacularly. One news anchor said that clerical oversight is about to cost them millions. They were right. A judge certified the class. Depositions began. Subpoenas followed. And with every courtroom door that opened, more truth spilled out. I never planned to become the face of whistleblower justice. But I was already there. So I leaned in. I founded a non-profit, Edit One Word. Named after the line I changed. We built resources for workers trapped in toxic companies. We partnered with legal experts to audit employment contracts. We taught people how to document, protect, and report. And the demand? Unbelievable. In 6 months, we helped over 900 people navigate threats, coercion, and retaliation. All because of a resignation letter that wasn't what it seemed. People often ask me, what would have happened if you hadn't made that edit? And I think about it a lot. If I'd signed it as is. If I'd walked away quietly. If I'd let fear dictate my future. I'd still be unemployed. They'd still be rich. And the truth would still be buried. But I didn't sign the letter they gave me. I signed my version. And in doing so, I rewrote more than my exit, I rewrote the rules. They thought it would fade. That I'd have my moment, do a few interviews, maybe sign a book deal, and then disappear into the algorithm like every other viral story. But the story didn't die down. Because the damage wasn't over. Halston and Price had tried to issue a formal statement 3 times. The first one tiptoed. "We take the allegations seriously and are committed to internal review." The second one snapped. "Ms. Rayner's allegations are exaggerated and misleading." The third? It was desperate. "Our firm was targeted by a disgruntled former employee. Legal action is forthcoming." By then, no one believed them. Clients fled. Employees quit. And media outlets turned their attention not just to what had happened, but to how long it had been happening. The ripple was now an undertow. 3 more finance firms were dragged in, sister companies registered under shell names, all traced back to the same IP block. The fraud network wasn't limited to Halston and Price. It was a hydra. Every time one head was cut off, 2 more grew. And my name? Still in every headline. I didn't seek attention, but I no longer avoided it. I appeared on panels, gave interviews, partnered with advocacy groups. And every time, I told the same truth. I was never brave. I was scared, and I signed anyway. But I didn't sign their lie. I wrote my own. That line became a slogan. People began using it online. Wrote my own. I saw it in captions, on t-shirts, even graffiti outside one corporate building. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was a movement. But every movement has pushback. And mine came fast, and sharp. I started getting emails from burner accounts. Photos of my apartment. Recordings of my interviews twisted out of context and posted with captions like, "Is this your role model?" One evening, I came home to find a dead crow on my doorstep. Its beak sewn shut with black thread. I called the police. They shrugged. "We can't prove it's related." But we both knew. Harris called me the next day. "We're assigning you a permanent liaison." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they're scared of you. And scared people lash out." I swallowed. "Should I stop?" "No," he said. "You're too close. The network's collapsing, and they know who started the avalanche." The class action suit moved forward. A judge ruled in our favor on preliminary motions. The invalid clause was officially declared unenforceable. That one sentence from my altered resignation was cited 23 times in the court's ruling. I printed it out, framed it, hung it above my desk. Edit One Word, my nonprofit, received its first major grant, a 6-figure sum from a foundation that had once funded corporate compliance. The irony wasn't lost on me. We expanded, built an online portal for anonymous contract reviews, launched a podcast, created a legal defense fund. Whistleblowers from 6 countries reached out. I remember one message from a nurse in Ontario who said, "I haven't signed the NDA yet. Thank you for giving me a reason to think twice." It made me cry. Not because it was emotional, but because I remembered what it felt like not to have that reason. One day, I got a call from an unlisted number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. "Scarlett Rayner," the voice said. "Yes. This is Jonathan Fairchild, formerly of Halston and Price." My chest tightened. Fairchild was the firm's internal auditor. He'd vanished after the indictments. "I want to help," he said. "Why?" "Because I knew what was happening. I was too much of a coward to stop it. But I archived everything. And I want to give it to you." We met in a hotel lounge under full federal escort. He brought a flash drive. Encrypted. Time-stamped. Meticulously labeled. Emails. Ledgers. Private messages. Unofficial directives to silence high-risk employees. But what stopped me cold was a document labeled HR_tactic manual.pdf. Inside was a guide, an actual manual, on how to legally coerce employees into resignation without triggering labor violations. It described my exact situation. Step by step. Blevin's tone. The setup. The voluntary language. It was all scripted. I handed the flash drive to Harris. He stared at the screen, stunned. "This is what we needed," he said. "This isn't just shady. This is designed abuse." We submitted the contents as evidence in 2 active cases. 2 weeks later, the DOJ announced new charges. 6 more executives arrested. 3 others fled the country. Interpol got involved. What began as a typo in their HR strategy was now a federal catastrophe. But even as justice spread, I couldn't shake the personal toll. I was exhausted, untrusting, on edge all the time. Therapists called it hypervigilance. I called it survival. One night, I broke down while brushing my teeth, just crumpled to the floor, sobbing in a heap. I didn't even know what triggered it. Maybe it was everything. Maybe it was just finally safe to fall apart. My mom called during that breakdown. I didn't answer, but I listened to her voicemail later. Scarlett, I know I didn't understand at first. I didn't get why you kept pushing. But now, I just want you to know, I see you. And I'm proud. I cried harder after that than I had the entire year. Sometimes people ask me what I would have done if they hadn't given me the choice to sign. If they just fired me outright. If I hadn't had the chance to edit one word. I think about that a lot. And I always land on the same truth. They handed me the pen. They assumed I'd sign their lie. But instead, I wrote the first sentence of a revolution. I was invited to speak at Columbia Law School. Not for a class. For the entire graduating class of legal ethics and corporate compliance. When the email came in, I blinked at it for nearly 10 minutes. Me? Speaking at a university that once wouldn't even give me a call back when I applied for grad school? It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like full-circle justice. The auditorium was packed. Suits, notepads, laptops glowing with open case files. I wore navy slacks, low heels, and a blazer that no longer reminded me of boardrooms filled with silent shame. This one felt like armor. The dean introduced me as a woman who redefined what a resignation letter could mean. When I stepped to the podium, I didn't talk about fraud first. I talked about fear. I didn't write that line because I was brave, I said. I wrote it because I was terrified. I was shaking when I did it. But I couldn't walk out without leaving a piece of truth behind. They listened, scribbling notes like I was delivering law. I didn't just change one word. I claimed one word. I claimed space. Authority. The right to document what they tried to bury. And that changed everything. The applause was long. Not performative. Respectful. I had gone from silenced to cited. After the event, a woman with silver hair and a steady grip took my hand. I was one of the early legal clerks who helped shape whistleblower protections in the 90s, she said. I never thought I'd meet someone who'd take those protections and make them catalytic. She paused. You gave the law teeth. Edit one word exploded. We were now in 3 countries. We had a hotline, a legal advisory board, an online tracker that let employees anonymously flag language in contracts we'd mapped from thousands of sources. And because of our pressure, 5 Fortune 500 companies quietly revised their employment agreements to remove coercive language. They didn't make headlines. But we archived everything. One morning, I received a letter. A real one, paper, ink, a blue envelope with wax-sealed initials. Inside was a handwritten note. We've never met. I worked in payroll at Holston & Price. I knew about Thistle. I stayed silent. But because of you, I've turned over everything I had. I'm sorry. And thank you. M. Attached was a copy of a flash drive receipt sent to federal investigators. That's what this was now. Not a story. Not revenge. A record. A permanent archive of what happens when someone refuses to disappear. And that terrified them more than anything. By then, I had received 3 separate settlement offers. Holston & Price's insurance company contacted my lawyer. The first offer was $500,000 with a strict NDA. The second was $1.2 million with non-disparagement clauses and a clause about ceasing media appearances. The third was $3 million, if I signed immediately and took down edit one word. I rejected all 3. My attorney asked, "Are you sure?" I was. If I sign a dollar amount, I said, I put a price tag on what I did. And what I did doesn't end with me. Instead, we filed a civil suit, not just for damages, but for a legal precedent. We called it Rayner versus Constructive Coercion Doctrine. We wanted a federal ruling that redefined what constitutes voluntary resignation under duress, especially in cases involving ethical violations and whistleblower suppression. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the next Scarlett. And the one after her. During the deposition phase, Thomas Blevins was forced to testify. His hair was grayer. His confidence cracked. My lawyer asked, "Did you instruct Ms. Rayner that she had no future employment prospects if she didn't sign the resignation?" Blevins stammered. I said, "She would struggle to find a firm that trusted her again." "In what way is that not coercive?" He had no answer. Just silence. The judge took notes. I stared him down. The same man who once tried to force me out with a smug smile now sat under oath, cornered by a truth he thought would never come back to bite him. Meanwhile, public support grew. I was named one of Time's voices of accountability. I declined a Netflix docuseries. Not because I didn't want the story told, but because I didn't want it commodified. Instead, we began working with educators, building curriculum that would teach high school and college students about workplace red flags, contract literacy, and ethical courage. I went home one weekend. To the house I grew up in. My mom had set out my old childhood desk in the living room. On it, she placed the framed printout of my resignation, my handwritten edit still visible. "I had it reprinted on archival paper," she said quietly. I laughed. "That's a bit much." "No," she said. "It's not enough." She pulled out a scrapbook she'd made. Every article. Every award. Even a sketch I'd drawn at 9 years old of me holding a microphone labeled Truth. I broke down. I hadn't realized she'd been paying attention all along. As the civil case continued, something unexpected happened. A group of young interns at another firm went public with a video. One of them held up a resignation letter with a line crossed out and new words written below. This resignation was obtained under retaliatory pressure. I reserve the right to pursue legal remedies. The caption read, "Thanks to Scarlett Rayner, we're not afraid to write the truth." I don't know if I'll win the civil case. The wheels of justice are slow and often cracked. But I do know this. Even if they never pay me a cent, they'll never forget the one woman who refused to sign their silence. There's a moment in every battle where things go quiet, not because it's over, but because everything that could be said, has been. That was where I stood. Months after the last arrest. Weeks after the final appeal was denied. Days after my civil case had its last hearing. I was no longer fighting. I was waiting. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. No protesters. No reporters. Just the steady tick of shoes against marble and the hum of overhead lights. My lawyer sat beside me, tapping his pen on a folder. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "But ask me again after the ruling." He smiled. "I think you already won, Scarlett." I wanted to believe that. But the truth is, when you go up against a machine as massive as corporate fraud, even when you win, you carry scars no one sees. The judge returned. She looked tired, but not weary. When she spoke, her voice carried no performance, just law. In the matter of Rayner versus Halston and Price, this court finds that the resignation in question was obtained under coercive conditions. The use of retaliatory pressure, combined with legal silencing tactics, constitutes constructive termination. My heart stopped. Constructive termination. It was the precedent we'd hoped for. And then came the words I'll never forget. Let this case be a standard moving forward, where resignation signed in fear is not considered consent. Where silence is not mistaken for compliance. We had rewritten the rules. Not just for me. For thousands. The ruling spread faster than I expected. Legal blogs exploded. Employment attorneys rewrote policy templates overnight. HR departments nationwide held emergency training sessions. And edit one word? It was now a registered policy watchdog, partnered with 4 universities, 8 firms, and a growing alliance of whistleblower protection coalitions. What began with a pen and pressure had become a systemic shift. I visited the firm's old office once. Just stood outside. The building had new branding now. Fresh logo. Glossy sign. Different fonts. New CEO. But the bones were the same. A receptionist walked out and did a double take. Wait, are you? I smiled gently. I was. And then I walked away. Life returned in pieces. I started sleeping again. Started laughing again. Made new friends, real ones, who knew me after the noise. I even began writing. A memoir? No. Something quieter. Personal essays. Stories about what it means to hold truth when it's heavy. To stand in a room full of people telling you to sit down, and still decide to speak. One day, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a cheap silver pen, taped to a note that read, "This one's yours. Write something that changes someone else's story, like you changed mine. J." There was no last name. But I didn't need one. I understood. So many people had reached out. Some to thank me. Some to confess. Some just to say, I didn't know we could say no. That's what gets me most. The quiet ones. The tired ones. The ones who think surviving means staying silent. And to every one of them I say, you don't have to burn your whole life down to make a point. Sometimes, you just edit one word. I hung my original resignation letter in a shadow box. It sits on the wall in the office of Edit One Word. Visitors always stop to read it. They see the scratched out line, the handwritten replacement, the initials next to it, SR. And underneath, in gold lettering, we engraved the words. I did not sign their silence. I did sign something that day. But it wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. It was a beginning. A document that no longer belonged to them, but to history. Signed under duress? Yes. But also signed with conviction. And that made all the difference.